Now, a major architect of the Trump tax cuts finally admits that the entire premise of the tax cuts, them paying for themselves, doesn't actually work. Now, this is Representative Kevin Brady. Now, he's the former chairman of the House Ways and Means and Taxation Committees, and he had admitted that it was, quote, hard to know how much of the cuts were fully paid for at the Peterson Foundation's annual fiscal summit. He said, quote, we don't know now, and it's hard to know now, but maybe we will know in year 8, 9, or 10 what revenues the tax cuts brought into the government over time. Right now, it's just way too early to tell. Oh, is it? No, it's not. It's not too early to tell. If you just look at the reduced revenues, which is reflected in, of course, having a higher deficit. And what do we have? We have higher deficits. Look, even without looking at all that, it's kind of ridiculous to think that cutting revenue would somehow increase revenue. That makes no sense. Oh no, if we cut our income, then we end up getting more money. In what world does that actually work? It doesn't. It doesn't. There's no world where that actually happens. It's made up. It's a pipe dream. I know. But Jeff, growth. It's going to supercharge the economy. It's growth. It's growth. Okay, well, let's look at the growth, right? Or actually, let's look at the cost first. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the cost of the tax cuts is actually around $1.9 trillion. And that's even taking into account any additional growth. And that's just projections of growth. We don't necessarily know. Oops. $1.9 trillion, even taking in any sort of growth. I thought it was supposed to pay for themselves. I thought it was supposed to be revenue neutral. Oh, it turns out, no, that was a lie. Now, Brady says, well, I mean, even though it's not going to bring in that kind of growth or pay for themselves, the tax cuts were still a good investment. Really? He said, quote, I don't think anything could have been worse for the deficit than to stick with the old economy and stick with the tax code that was so outdated. Now, again, we have more deficits, higher deficits, right? And still low growth. How is this better? Oh, right, it's not. At least not for the American economy. At least it's not for regular working people. Now, as far as outdated goes, you want to know what's outdated? The idea that tax cuts pay for themselves and that the wealth will somehow trickle down. It's not. Those two notions have been completely and utterly debunked over the last 40 years. When we lowered taxes on the rich, we did not have more growth. We had larger deficits, which, by the way, Republicans blame on poor people needing welfare and higher concentrations of wealth at the top. That has not trickled down. In fact, rich people just keep getting richer. As for growth, GDP is up about 0.7% from last year. Not 1%, not 2%, basically growing at Obama levels. Well, Obama really didn't do a whole lot. The only tax increase that he got through was through the ACA. Okay, that's fine. That actually is a progressive tax. But when it comes to marginal rates on the wealthiest Americans, they stayed basically the same, about 31%. That is until Donald Trump, 35%, until Donald Trump and the Republicans lowered it to 21%. And still, no growth, right? No noticeable bump in growth. And this is especially important, no noticeable bump in wages. Nothing, no bump unless you were incredibly wealthy. Then you got a gigantic bump. A huge one. Whatever happened to supercharging the economy? No, what happened is the corporations got the money and they did gigantic stock buybacks. They didn't raise wages. They didn't offer better benefits. They didn't create more jobs. No. They rewarded themselves by inflating their own stock values, which creates an artificial bubble, making the company appear to be more wealthy than it actually is. They're not more wealthy. They're not doing better. It just looks like it so that investors will go in and buy shares. And once they buy shares, executives cash in and they put that money in their own pockets. And this is all while corporations are paying less taxes than ever. And while this happens, individual tax cuts have been negated by the rate of inflation. So congratulations, your tax cuts have done nothing. You know what's going on right now? 40% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency. 60% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency. That's a car breaking down, that's a transmission going out. Almost half of all Americans cannot afford basic necessities for survival. That's not a situation where you need to budget better. You can budget all day, but if the money doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. If you're not getting paid enough, no amount of magical budgeting is going to fix your problem. And besides, half of all Americans are not lazy, irresponsible people. No, it's the economy, and these tax cuts do nothing for these people. Do you know, on average, people making around the federal minimum wage, it's $15,000 a year, and up to $25,000 a year, they got an average tax cut of around $40 for the entire year. $40, while the rich, the top 1%, save an average of $33,000 per year. Is it any question who these tax cuts served? They are, as usual, for the rich, by the rich. And it just shows you again how much trickle-down is, how much of a scam it is, because it has and always will be a scam. Don't believe it when they tell you, no, tax cuts are going to create jobs and create growth. It never happens. It never will. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.